Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. If you love this watch, email me, tmosso@thewatchbox.com. It's in the description below. Your purchase and pricing email question line for buying this or any watch you see on any Watchbox platform. Reach out to me directly, tmosso@thewatchbox.com. And today we are discussing the new for 2020 Rolex Oyster Perpetual 41mm and Rolex 904L stainless steel. This timepiece is the reference 124300 and it features the coral red dial. It is all new, but first let's talk about the size because size comes first. 41mm in diameter means it's a broader oyster case. Certainly as an Oyster Perpetual, this is probably the flattest and least bubble-like model ever. The timepiece measures 11.7mm thick, and from lug to lug, it's a fairly compact 47.3mm, but it grows a bit. End link to end link, it measures a fairly beefy, for Rolex, 51.4, and that is the largest Oyster Perpetual ever by far. But on my wrist, which you can see is 16 centimeters in circumference, it doesn't overwhelm, even as it does have substantially more presence. Now, the original Oyster Perpetual of 1933 was nicknamed the Bubbleback because the rotor winding system, Perpetual, in the water-resistant oyster case, created a profile that was a little bit stout, and that bubble-like shape, that pot-bellied look, led to the nickname Bubbleback. This is the antithesis of that, as it's broad and flat in a way no previous Oyster Perpetual has ever been. The timepiece fits well on my wrist, but I wouldn't necessarily wear it on a wrist smaller than 14 centimeters in circumference. Go for a 36mm if your wrist is that small. The timepiece is nicely made, and as you can see, the bracelet, a traditional Rolex Oyster bracelet, 3-link design, staggered link alignment and size with a satin top, a little bit of a taper, polished outer faces, removable links fixed by screws, and there have been some upgrades to the Oyster Perpetual compared to its previous generation, as the clasp internals are now polished, and whereas the previous generation had only divots inside the clasp, we still have those divots so you can change the bracelet anchoring position using a strap tool, but we now have the EasyLink 5mm tool-free adjustment system. 5mm in, 5mm out. It's like adding or removing one sizable link. You still have the embossed indentation, Rolex 5-point coronet, but new is that each of the peaks of the coronet has been polished internally, so that is new for this generation. The clasp altogether represents a major upgrade. Rolling around to the case, you can see that it's still not the super case, as its lugs are nicely tapered, and there's still a little bit of a compound rounded profile here. You can also see that unlike the conical bezel frequently used on Rolex steel sports watches, here we have a domed bezel. That is a nod to the old bubble backs, but again, this watch is more broad and flat with a handsome sweeping aspect ratio not previously seen in the Oyster Perpetuals. Twin lock crown, screw down, 100-meter water resistance, and then that extraordinary coral red dial. In photos online, it looks orange. On my screen, it probably looks red to you, but here's the key. If I had to describe its true color, it would be Rosso Corsa, the orange-tinged racing red of Scuderia Ferrari. It is that red. White gold hands, white gold indices, white gold Rolex coronet. You can see it's a black printed red dial, and then it has that little crown between Swiss and made, as the Prost 2018 Rolex dials do. Double indices at 9, 3, and 6, and the timepiece internally with Rolex manufacturer caliber 3230. It's a big upgrade in here with a 70-hour power reserve instead of the previous 48. The 70-hour power reserve enabled by a thinner mainspring barrel with a bigger mainspring and the new Liga-etched Rolex Chronergy escapement, which is basically Rolex's answer to the Omega coaxial. They help to extend the power reserve to almost 3 days. It features stop seconds. It is shock resistant, courtesy of a free sprung balance and a full balance bridge. It has a 6-position adjusted handmade overcoil hairspring, which is to say the overcoil allows the watch to beat with concentric breathing of the hairspring in all 6 positions of adjustment. So that's what I mean by that. It helps the watch to earn a COSC chronometer certification, but then Rolex goes above and beyond the COSC by certifying the watch to run no worse than -2 + 2 seconds per day. That is the Rolex superlative chronometer standard. Of course, the timepiece beats away at 28,800 vibrations per hour. And the bidirectional winding system has been upgraded for this model year as it now features a rotor bearing, which is more shock resistant than the previous jeweled staff. The alloy used for the hairspring is also a blue oxidized niobium zirconium, which makes this watch highly anti-magnetic. And for this generation of the movement, Rolex ditches the old KIF shock protection. It was long-serving and useful, but now Rolex goes full proprietary, even making its own shock protection springs, and that is called Paraflex. It is all Rolex internally, right down to the lubricants, which Rolex makes in-house. A formidable contender and one of the best new sports watches of the year. This is a timepiece for which less is more, and the dial, the miles of style from the dial define the soul of this piece. It's more exuberant than a standard Rolex, and it proves that yes, even Rolex can crack a smile. Reach out to Tim Mosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details. And we're back with the Rolex Oyster Perpetual 41 by Night Rolex Chromolite Blue Lume.